Welcome, everyone. I am Rosa Cabrera, director of the Rafael Cintrón Ortiz Latino Cultural Center, better known as the LCC. Thank you for joining us in this Zona Abierta program featuring the third season of radical research from BIPOC scholars here at UIC. Zona Abierta is one of the LCC's premier public program series. It highlights the intersection of art, humanities, science, culture, and civic life with presentations by local, national, and international artists, scholars, and community leaders about pressing social and environmental issues affecting the life of Latinx and Latin Americans while making connections to other communities here in Chicago and abroad. Today's program is the second of three presentations that the LCC is hosting this semester with scholars who joined the Bridge to Faculty program at UIC during the last 2 years. The presenters have been sharing their experiences and respective research through an intersectional lens, revealing the complexity and particularity of their research and how the life of those in the margins are impacted. If you're not familiar with the Bridge to Faculty program, this is a recruitment initiative in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Engagement designed to attract underrepresented postdoctoral scholars with the goal of a direct transition to a tenure-track junior faculty position after 2 years being accepted into the program. We're grateful to the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Engagement, and also the Honors College for supporting today's presentation. Our guest speakers for today's program is Dr. Carla Tejada from the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering, who will present her research related to urban freight transportation and the diverse set of impacts that residential deliveries have on cities. Dr. Tejada recently received her doctorate from the City College of New York City Civil Engineering Department. Congratulations, Dr. Tejada. Her research interests include modeling urban freight transportation, network modeling, optimization, and multimodal interactions in the urban scenario. Much of her research has focused on measuring the social impact of freight networks and also evaluating the current freight policies in certain cities. While working towards her PhD, Dr. Tejada was involved with the Charles B. Rangel Infrastructure Workforce Initiative, serving as a curricular development assistant and a transportation module instructor. She also collaborated with the New York City Department of Transportation Pedestrian Unit, where she developed a model to measure a pedestrian demand map at the zip code level of the city of New York. You can check Dr. Tejada's full bio in the link that's been already provided in the chat. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Tejada. Bienvenida.
Muchas gracias, and thank you very much. Thank you, Rosa, and thank you, Jorge, for inviting me. And thank you to LCC, to all the LCC team for inviting me to give this talk. And I will share my screen. I hope everybody can see now the presentation. And I will invite everybody who joined. If you have a pressing question for me, then just make sure that you can unmute yourself and ask me. We can make this interactive, or you can save the questions until the end. It's up to you. And first, I want to start with a question to y'all. And first off is, who has never ordered something online? I can see you all here. Just, give the thumb up if you have never ordered something on Amazon or received an online order. And I can see that actually nobody has given me any reaction. So pretty much we all know what it means to place an order online, and how our process usually works, right? For instance, if I would like to buy some running shoes, right, I have several options online through which I can shop. And one of them is Amazon. Say I can go to the parent organization of the shoemaker, and then I can go to other providers of shoes, right? And in this case, for instance, say I decided to go through Amazon and then I placed the order and I know that it's going to be available on April 10th. And that is information I received. There was an economic transaction on the back. And then what do? I wait until April 10th and my packages pretty much arrive to my door, right? But in all that process, through all this system, there is a lot of things going on, right? So somebody had to pick up the inventory, then they had to do through sorting, packing, and finally the delivery. In this conversation that we're going to have, that hopefully is a conversation or presentation, I'm going to focus on the last part of delivery, because what we have seen with the rise of e-commerce and the rise of also the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic is that now currently all the delivery or most of the deliveries are done in urban areas. And when we talk about urban freight transportation, it's something very far away or something very technical as we can think. But urban freight transportation focuses on the study of collection of movement and distribution of goods by or for commercial entities taking place in urban areas. And this is a very general definition of urban freight transportation. And within there are several categories, right? One of them being residential deliveries. And one of the things that I did for my dissertation that I presented in April last year is that residential deliveries are one specific and growing areas of urban freight transportation, and they can be defined as deliveries that start in a commercial building and end in residential addresses. One of the main contributions from this definition is that deliveries include several goods that can be parcels, food, and groceries. All of them fall in the realm of urban freight transportation and residential deliveries. And I decided to tackle and to analyze what happened with residential deliveries and the impact with cities from 3 points of views. The first one is online shopping, and then what happens with the demand, right? And the effects of urban freight planning. The second is what happened before the last mile. There is this very specific, important part, which is the last portion of the delivery, but there are several movements happening before that have an impact on residential deliveries. And finally, the social effects of a warehouse development link to urban freight transportation and above all residential deliveries. So let's start by discussing the analysis of the demand of online shopping, right? And a lot of the research that I'm going to present is based in New York City, but I'm starting to also bring these questions in Chicago, and you'll see that there's a lot of things that relate from city to city and that we can start analyzing, right? Another thing I would like to mention is that urban freight is one of the smallest divisions when we talk about city planning. Although right now, as it's growing, it's starting to get more interest from urban planners in general, right? So if we talk about urban freight policy in the city of New York, which is one of the cities in the US that has been asking the most questions related to urban freight policy, we can see that there are tons of, well, there are not tons, but there are many urban freight policies that are in place. However, very little of these initiatives or of the expected initiatives that the city wants to develop are focused on residential deliveries. And one of the main differences between commercial and residential deliveries is that commercial deliveries can be planned a little bit easier than residential deliveries, right? So commercial deliveries go and in, say, for instance, a grocery store, and they usually have inventory planning and so on. But residential delivery is pretty much everybody else who places an order. So the demand is a little bit more all over the place or fuzzy. And that's important for us to know, because that also allows the city to make plans to improve the type of deliveries by reducing also the effects on the city or the impacts on city and citizens, right? So for this study, the area of study was New York City, and we used as data the Citywide Mobility Survey, which is one of the few data sets that actually asks questions on online shopping frequency. And we decided to check three important variables and characteristics, which are individual characteristics, socioeconomic backgrounds of people, household characteristics, which include household size and residency type, and then we also include transportation and access variables, right? So vehicle access, bicycle access, and transit access. And we decided to model that to see what happened, right, in the city of New York. Another interesting thing that the citywide mobility survey gave us is online shopping frequency per good for three goods: groceries, prepared food, and general on other packages. And it also gave us an overview of how people shop online by day of the week and how willing are people to retrieve their packages or to accept city logistics solutions, right? So the two graphs here show the daily preference for online shopping. We can see that across all boroughs, Friday is the day when people order the most. But also we can see that most people want their packages to be delivered to their doorstep or their lobby, the lobby of their buildings. And at the same time, about 56% of the people are willing to travel under 5 blocks to retrieve their packages. So from the point of view of planners thinking about freight, these should give us a hint of logistic solutions we can place nearby people so as they can retrieve their packages, right? And decrease the effects that these have on the existing transportation network. However, in general, when we treat freight, we see it from a very high level, right? In this case, with this model, what we did was to break down at the model at the zip code level. And these are some of the likelihood of online shoppings that we found and some of the results that we found from this research. And we can see that from zip code to zip code across all the boroughs, this changes, and that there's a high link between the average likelihood of purchasing or of online ordering and the population density, but also versus the grocery density, pretty much versus the establishment density, right? So in this, the major takeaway is that everybody in the city shops differently for all these three packages, and that it does depend on the availability that they have nearby to access the goods, right? Once we saw this, the next graph that I'm going to show you is we put everything together at the zip code level. And one of the things we found is that in New York City, which is a very dense city in the US, there's a high demand for at least one of the studied goods across all over the place, right? But when we think about what solutions or city solutions or plans we can put in place at the city limits to serve these goods or to make sure that these goods are available to people and are delivered, in an efficient manner and a safe manner also for the delivery person, then this map gives us an overview of where these solutions should be placed, right? The other thing that we found out from this study is that both the operation specificities and the good characteristics should be considered when planning for freight in urban areas. And this is one of the widest gaps that we see today between the actual research, but also what is happening on the streets, right? And there's a huge chance for us to become more involved as engineers or as urban planners into making urban deliveries more streamlined and affecting less the general distribution of the city, So to conclude, we saw that borough-specific models demonstrate the impacts of individual demographic, household, and transportation access variables are not consistent across locations. So to make plans at the high level actually is not necessarily a good approach, considering that there are so many things impacting how people purchase online. And then the other thing is that the variations are important when creating urban freight plans because they have to be location and commodity specific. So that was one of the main conclusions from the first study that we did, which was based on demand. The second part is based on the analysis of the upstream logistics of residential deliveries. And in general, when we try to measure e-commerce activity, and because residential deliveries come a lot from e-commerce activity, is that there are several groups that we consider when talking about e-commerce activity, right? But it's very hard to measure or to find one data set that allow us to put together everything all at once. Like there was a movie a while ago, but pretty much that allow us to measure what happens from the moment that the package is delivered. How can we measure everything from above? And there was no real data set. There's no real data set available. So the data set that we found for this study is tracking records. And the questions that we asked is, does tracking records actually allow us to inform anything about the transportation system? And also, is there any gaps in research that these data can actually help us answer questions right about? So if you know and this study was based in Chicago, and if we have order online, there are usually a tracking record that we have. And I don't know if anybody here has been curious enough to check what happens or what this little number actually tell us. And pretty much what it does, it gives us a timestamp and a location stamp of where our package is, right? So from the moment we place an order till the moment it's delivered, we know exactly where our package is. So we gathered information from many people in the zip code surrounding the star, right? And we actually did not get a lot of observations, but when I'm going to talk about the results, you'll see that this was very informative actually. And we can see that we could make the analysis for all the zones of delivery. So we had the pickup zone divided in, so we divided the entire delivery journey in 4 zones, being the first zone the pickup zone, and the 4th zone the delivery zone. And that includes the last mile, which is the last portion of the trip of our package, right? And we were able to actually have really good results and see all the variety of responses and of delivery times across several carriers. But one of the most interesting findings is that we could actually map all the operation for these carriers across the 4 zones, right? And once we did that, one of the main things that we found is that if we see commerce and if we see packages that go to residential areas, almost all of them touch at one point urban areas. So these lead us to ask other questions, which include, are urban areas actually ready to accept, or are they ready, or are there any plans in place that actually would allow the delivery of these goods or the passing through of these goods in the most efficient way? And we actually don't know the question yet. So there are a lot of future research that we can keep on taking in this approach. And to conclude this part, we show that the data allow us to compare and understand the scope of the operation for each carrier. But there were still limitations on this data set, since it does not allow us to see other important information for logistics, for instance, the number of packages or the mode of delivery. And by mode of delivery, I mean if the package is delivered by truck, van, or even cargo bikes, right? Then the other thing that we found from this data set is that it's very interesting, and even this very small data set allow us to understand how does the upstream logistics of residential deliveries look like, and also how fast do package get up to the last mile. And one of the things we saw that it's written on the paper is that there is a lot of variability from before the last mile. Every carrier is focused on making the last mile very efficient. That's actually one of the parts of the delivery that costs the most. But if there's a lot of variability in the other parts, no matter how much you control for the last mile, then if you do not control for the variability before, then you're also in big trouble, right? And then what also we found is that this study could guide planning agencies to recognize existing data gaps, but also to how to use new data or data that has already been existing to approach problems, right, from carriers and from delivery. And finally, the last portion of this research is we know that for the goods we are delivering, they have to come from somewhere, right? It's not just about the last mile or the upstream logistics. It's not just about how many orders we placed, but they have to come from somewhere. And for a long time, there's been this thought that warehouses and logistic facilities were located outside of cities. During the pandemic, and also seeing at the surge of demand that is currently going on for packages, there is this new trend called proximity logistics. And going back to New York City, one of the things that we could see is that in New York City, the number of warehouses during the pandemic and after the pandemic increased within city limits. Now, if you've been to New York City, that's a very expensive city, and the price of land is really important, right? And the other major thing we saw, well, when we were analyzing this problem, is that in the United States, and specifically in New York City, there is not a real data repository of warehouses. So we don't actually know where warehouses are, but we can check where warehouses are based on land code uses, right? So the map that you see here presents us all the areas in blues are in blue are the census tracts that permit warehouse development, and all the area in gray, due to code, pretty much land use code, do not allow for the creation of warehouses in those spaces. And if you can see, there's actually a big portion of the city that can hold warehouses, right? So the question was, what does the population look like in these areas? For this, we also decided to look at two specific cases. The first specific cases is, of course, Amazon, which is one of the main players in e-commerce and in residential deliveries. And the second main actor are dark stores. And by dark stores, we mean all these facilities that have been starting to appear since 2020, 2021, that are actually facilities that deliver grocery goods, like small grocery stores that we cannot access, but that provide 15 minutes or free grocery deliveries, right? So we cannot access, we can see them walking around the city, but we cannot go in. And if we go in, it's just to pick up our order. But there's a worker, there's an employee inside actually sorting the goods, making all the activities inside of a warehouse, right? And I'm going to show you a photo about that. And one of the major things, at least in this map, is that in New York City, warehouses have been traditionally located along waterfronts and also into multimodal hubs with high access to the highway, right? So we also decided to make two maps from the examples that we are considering. So the Amazon warehouses look like in the Amazon picture, and they are located very close by also the highway system. The line in red is the highway system. And then you can see a gray buffer, a 0.5 mile buffer across the New York City interstate. And as we can see, most of the Amazon facilities locate nearby these interstate, right? But then if we go to see the dark stores, this is a photo of the dark store that actually is located here in Chicago, but they look pretty much the same across all the country, across many cities. And as I mentioned in here, is you can see that there's a small parking lot for bikes, right? And then if we can go inside, we cannot walk through the aisles. Somebody else would do that for us and either give us our goods, or they will most probably deliver the goods. And one of the first shocking things about this is that if you see the locations, they are actually not necessarily located nearby the interstate, asking us to raise many questions. And one of the positive things is that now we can say these new types of warehouses or proximity logistic warehouses are not necessarily locating in vulnerable areas or where people, that was a high conception before, but also, and that's the problematic part of it, right? They are not necessarily locating near the New York City interstate. And if you've been there, this is one of the cities with worst traffic in the US. So they are also freight generators, both inbound and outbound. So they not only deliver goods, but they also have to be replenished somehow, right? So that means that most probably trucks come into each of those locations, and that creates big burden in existing streets and roads that are not necessarily part of the New York City interstate, right? Goods have to move somewhere. They have to find one way to move. And what we can see in here with these new proximity logistic facilities, we can see that they pretty much escape most of the rules. And also comparing with our previous map, right? They are not necessarily located in the blue areas. So what is going on, right? So those are the questions that we wanted to ask. And now talking a little bit more about the New York City highway system. Here, I just place some of the important areas over there. And one of the things we can see is that in this part of Staten Island, there is a really great connectivity with New York, New Jersey, and above all with the airport. It's very close. We can get through the airport and through, in general, New Jersey, through these highway. And this is also a huge link between New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And for all of those of you who don't know, Eastern Pennsylvania is one of the areas with the highest development on regular warehouse activity, right? There's tons of space, tons of warehouses, and that is from where most of New York City's freight come, right? Then there's these warehouses here, both for dark stores and Amazon stores. In this area, it's very close to the Lincoln Tunnel, which is a very expensive tunnel, but it's also pretty much the way to go to reach New Jersey. And then I also pointed out these three black circles there because these are historical, first near waterfronts, but also historical multi-model hubs. And this is where also the new warehouses are locating, right? Then we finally can go into the social aspects and the social impacts of it. And we developed in my research team with my advisor, a city social vulnerability index, and we applied that at the city level, right? So the map that we can see here is all the vulnerabilities in the city. If the number is darker or closer to 0.5, then that means that there's more vulnerability. And if it's lighter, we can see that there's less vulnerability, right? And one of the most important graphs that allowed us to make the observations is that in general, warehouses are located, and this is a number that proves this to us, warehouses and logistic facilities are located in areas that are more vulnerable in the city, okay? And then if we look at these at the borough level, we can see that these still maintains, right? So Manhattan is another world because there's most of the vulnerabilities in the north, but we can see that there are two peaks on the logistic facilities vulnerability, and one of them is where people are more vulnerable. For the rest of the boroughs, we can see that all the logistic facilities in those boroughs are located where there's more vulnerability. And then if we look at the specific cases, one of the things that was really interesting for us in this research is that, of course, Amazon would follow regular patterns, right, for their locations. But in Manhattan, because in Manhattan, the type of facility is different, and the type of facility is what we call on demand, and they tend to want to locate very close to the customers. But across the other boroughs, and even in Manhattan, one of the things that was the most shocking to us is that the purple line would represent the dark stores actually locate in areas that have not not necessarily large vulnerability. And this can be good because we are breaking a paradigm, but it also raises a lot of questions that I mentioned before on how are we actually using the streets. And the other question that arises is if these facilities that are actually delivering groceries located in less vulnerable areas, does this means that we're actually providing more access to the people that are vulnerable and that should require these goods? Or are we just inflating the offer of people that don't necessarily need that? I don't know if that makes sense, but we can discuss about this later. And then besides this, we also look at the workforce trends. And in this case, we use 3 categories defined by the United States Census Bureau. And we focus on 3 specific areas, which were couriers and messengers, warehouse and storage workers, and people working in the truck transportation. All of these have a link to residential deliveries, right? So from the workforce trends, we saw that for couriers and messengers, there is a very little increase in number of jobs year over year. But if you see the amount of money paid to those workers, the variability there is very, very low across all the boroughs, right? And then we did an age analysis as well, both in number of jobs, but also average monthly earnings. And we saw that the year where most young people were paid were in 2020. But if you see the average monthly earnings, it's usually older people, like not older people, but more senior people that earn more. And in general, this is because in this industry, as you grow, as you keep on adding years, it means that probably you will have other types of job opportunities, right? And then if we talk about the warehouse and storage group, this is a very interesting figure because in 2018, there's a huge growth in the number of jobs and also a huge increase in the average monthly earnings. But it's also in 2018 when there was a huge shortage of warehousing space in the United States and also in New York City, right? Also, we can see that all these trends vary, and it was just only in Staten Island those jobs increased. And also just in Staten Island is where all the wages went up. Now, if we see at Brooklyn and Manhattan in 2019, actually these wages started to go down, right? Then we can see an interesting trend also in ages, but the most interesting results are in the truck transportation industry from age. If we talk again about total jobs and average earnings, we can see that the total number of jobs remains steady and that only in Manhattan there was an increase on average earnings. But for the truck transportation industry, we can see that there is a very heavy growth trend as people grow older, right? The reason for this is because you can get a commercial driver's license anytime, pretty much after 16, right? But if you, I think it's actually before, yeah, you can get it at 16, but until 21, you cannot leave state limits, right? So after 18, you can start driving a little bit more. But as you start adding hours of driving, then you start sort of like unlocking levels. And you can first move farther and also transport other type of goods, such as hazardous materials and so on, that sometimes allow you to earn more, right? So from these 2 analyses, we saw that first, proximity logistics is something that's going on. I have another research showing that this is actually a worldwide event. And one of the major impacts for that is e-commerce, of course. Then we also see that proximity logistics are seeing an expansion in New York City. I'm starting this research also here in Chicago, and there's a similar trend going on. Then also we see that when we calculate social vulnerability, right? First off, that metric needs a lot of improvement, and also we need logistic social vulnerability. But one of the interesting things is that logistic facilities are definitely located in more vulnerable areas with all the externalities that intake, right? Then finally, for the working trends, we can see that they are heavily location dependent, but also time dependent. And that allows us to think that we need more disaggregated data than the one that we can find in general sources or in public available sources, right? Another very important thing is that these numbers most probably are wrong, because there is a huge part of the population that work in warehouses and delivery, above all, that cannot be counted because they are considered as undocumented population. So with all of this, I finish my talk. I think I talk over 10 minutes from the time that I was allowed. But now I would like to open the floor for questions. And thank you so much. Again, my name is Carla Tejada, and here's my email if you have any particular question that you want to ask me on this topic. And I will be more than happy to open the floor to questions now.
Hi, everyone. And then you did amazing on time, Carla, so don't feel like you overspoke. It was great hearing about your research. And thank you for sharing all of your work with us. So hi, everyone. My name is Nat. I'm the LCC program coordinator, and like Carla said, we're going to be transitioning into our Q&A session for this program. Again, thank you so much, Carla, for your presentation and sharing your work with us. We do have a couple of questions already for you, but I also want to open up the space and invite folks from the audience to ask their questions as well. Please post your questions in the chat or raise your hand under the reaction button on Zoom, and I'll be able to call on you to unmute your mic. And while we wait for folks to kind of gather their thoughts, we'll begin with the first question, the first question that we have for you is, what impact do residential deliveries and online shopping have on local grocery stores and access, and what impact may it have on food deserts, particularly in Chicago, right? Like some South Side and West Side neighborhoods are known for their lack of grocery stores. So how could the delivery systems also impact that relationship?
That is actually a great question that I'm starting to analyze now as part of the Bridge to Faculty program. And I mentioned that dark stores are located where in non-vulnerable areas, right? So right now we can think, usually these dark stores offer 15 minutes or less delivery, right? So we can, if we put all the research together, right, we can say that right now dark stores are only serving high-income population, right? So non-vulnerable population. But there's also a lot of grocery stores already existing in these areas, right? Above all in New York City. However, this is a great question that allows me to expand in what I'm doing now. Right now, we are starting to see how new modes or methods of delivery can help us bring more food accessibility. And dark stores can be used for that, or other type of sources. We're not sure what, because we just started that part of the research. But there is a huge opportunity for e-commerce to answer those questions and to provide more accessibility to those that don't have it right now, right? So that was a great question, and I don't have an answer now, but ask me hopefully in 2 more years. Thank you.
Yeah, it's totally okay if you don't have a decisive answer to some of these questions. But another question that we have for you comes from our director, Rosa. She asks, besides retiring diesel and using renewable energy, what are some other things that cities and consumers can do to address the large amount of population that freight transportation and warehouses create?
That's another great question. And that's another thing that I'm also starting to research on, sustainable modes. So in the literature, there are a lot of new modes for delivery, right? Vans and trucks, like usually right now, diesel powered are the norm. But with new technology, there are other opportunities, right? Such as electric vehicles, electric vans, and so on. There's also another big part of the literature that looks into drone delivery and into robot delivery that are also more sustainable. But one of the most sustainable ways, and that is a pretty much low-hanging fruit, it's also cargo bikes, right? there is a huge now interest on the community to assess cargo bikes. One of the main problems, and that's also one of the things that I'm starting to research on right now, it's on the fact that probably there's not enough infrastructure for cargo bikes to move around, but they have proven to be really good for deliveries, and they are used in other countries. They are used in other cities that are not Chicago, and they are versatile. They don't require a lot of parking. They are good for health, for the health of the cyclist, but they're also a low emission, very versatile mode of transporting the goods. So those two great questions actually piggyback on what I want to do right now and what I am starting to do here at UIC. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm glad that our questions are sort of inciting like thought and conversation, which is always really great to see that comes from these programs. Um, I'm just doing a quick run of the chat here. So we do have one question that I kind of feel like touches upon a few things that were going on in the chat earlier and also come up when you were particularly talking about vulnerable communities. So many folks in Chicago complain that the warehouses are placed in communities of colors and overpromise. Right, they overpromise jobs, income, or an increase in income, but often under deliver, which is a big burden to our working class neighborhoods. Could you share a little bit more about the social and environmental effects of where warehouses are placed? And some people in the chat did mention things such as environmental racism. And also, a shameless plug, we also have a really amazing exhibition going on at the Social Justice Gallery located on Halsted Street, where you can actually see our Climates of Inequality exhibition up until May 25th. And we also put it in the chat, not to take over the question, but I felt like it was a good transition to plug our exhibition.
Yeah, that's also a great question, and it's great that you're doing that. I'll definitely go. So one of the major problems we found when we were doing this type of research, it is that there is no city or state or national database that allows you to see specifically where warehouses are, right? I wonder why, but this is one of the major burdens, and that's pretty much us as researchers having to do a lot of field work to try to identify where warehouses are, right? The second part of the question was if there actually was, besides them being located in more vulnerable populations, if there is a burden and other types of social disparities, and actually there is. In the New York City area, what we found is that they always try to build warehouses promising work and promising labor, but one of the initial parts of the results that we decided just to delete because the amount of data that we have was not necessarily good enough for that, but we saw that actually the amount of people working for the transportation industry in these areas did not vary significantly after warehouses were located, right? This also has to be taken with a grain of salt because the amount of the only metrics that we have are super high level, but that definitely puts on the need that we need more granular data, and we need more data based on who is actually working in these warehouses, right? The second thing that, and this I know not necessarily from research, but also from experiences with the community and with people living in the community, and also through working on the Wrangell Center, is that a lot of times these facilities offer work, but they get to locate in area like work for the surrounding community, but they locate in places where there is a lot of senior population, right? So that sort of, working in a warehouse is very intensive. It's very intense. So they will probably not give these jobs to these people. And then it's the problem with this type of research and the lack of granular data is that there are a lot of questions that are left in the air, and that we need more data to be able to answer all these questions, right? There's the Red Hook area also in New York City that has seen an explosion of warehouses, but the population, they're located very close to they call it NACHA developments, which is where people with a low income can live. And we don't know if they are actually being employed in these facilities, right? So, you know, there are a lot of variables coming in, and there are a lot of questions that we can still ask, and also a lot of questions that probably will remain unanswered if we don't find better data. But we're still working on this, and this is a very new topic on social sustainability and warehouse activity. So, you know, maybe keep on reading my papers, and hopefully we will find an answer soon. But yeah, these are great questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And now I'm actually going to pass it over to an audience member who has their hand raised. So I'm going to pass it over to Carolina. If they're still here with us.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that I was signed in under Carlos. This is Jose Acosta, actually. Sorry.
No, it's
I'm
okay.
with. Oh yeah, it's because my colleague Carolina, who's a UIC student, is who forwarded me this invite. So that's been me in the chat this whole time. But yeah, Jose Acosta. I'm the Transportation Justice Program Manager at Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, and also one of the co-chairs of the Transportation Equity Network. Also a PhD candidate down in the University of Illinois in Geography and GIS. Also focusing on issues of freight, more focused on like environmental justice and air pollution, things like that. But first of all, bienvenido a Chicago. Perfect. This is a really wonderful place to be doing this work, just given our status as the most important rail hub in North America. So this is a great place to be doing this work. I wanted just to mostly offer a plug. This is really, really, really important work that you're doing. And we're also doing similar work. We're leading most of the freight reform work happening and warehouse reform work happening here in Chicago. And I definitely want to connect with you to talk. I know we're already almost out of time. So I want to connect with you to talk more about some of the things that are happening. I think where your work can be really valuable. And to connect you with people like the Warehouse Workers for Justice, who's been doing a lot of stuff around warehousing labor. And Environmental Defense Fund recently has been working on a proximity mapping report that's focused on warehousing location in the state of Illinois. And I think actually they might even be looking at New York too. But have actually used like a real estate database, which you of course have to pay to get access to. But they've been able to use that to get information around the warehousing locations. But yeah, I just wanted to put in the plug to offer to connect our organization with you, and to talk more about how we can potentially collaborate. There's a lot of really great things happening right now. And yeah, I'll just leave it there so time for other people to add in any questions or anything. But I'll follow up over email if that's okay, and then we can keep talking. So thank you so much for this really great work and really great presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, I being new here, I'm still finding my way, and there are a lot of really great ideas and questions, and I love to connect with you. Thank you.
That's great to see. It's always really great to see the community connections that come through over our public program. So I'm really happy that happened. We do have like 2 minutes left, but we're actually going to combine our last two questions. So hopefully you'll be able to kind of touch on both. So one is just the question of how you became interested in doing research on freight transportation, but also a question from Carlos Morales is, if you could have the perfect future for freight transportation, how would you imagine it would look like, and how would you make it happen? So yeah, those are going to be our final questions for today, but please feel free to speak.
Definitely. So yeah, thank you for the questions. I became interested in urban freight transportation because I got to work in a company that does urban freight transportation, and having a logistics background, I think that that was really interesting. I've also been very interested always about planes and how they move people and goods. This was since I was a child, but I decided not to work in the air freight industry, but to decide to work on city, also because I think that it's needed, and it's also really great when you can see your work actually being implemented in the sidewalks, right? So that's something that I really like. And then for me, if it was, so first for me, I think freight is required. One of the women that I really look up to had a really nice quote saying, during the pandemic, we all had to stop, right? All the people had to be in their houses, and we were forced to do that, but we survived. The one thing that never stopped was freight, right? So we need freight, we need services, we need freight is also the pickup of garbage, right? That we need to plan for. So freight is very required in cities. So I know and I hope that it's not going anywhere. But we need to protect freight, right? So for me, it's all about having the correct network, but also sustainable modes of transportation that are not heavily dependent on diesel trucks and like on pretty much trucks. Then I also believe that for that, in order for us to be able to use, for instance, cargo bikes, infrastructure has to be more like way more safe than it is right now, and way more connected than it is right now. And there should also be small facilities supporting that type of delivery. It's not fair that a person has to move over 10 miles in a bike because it's not humanly great also moving packages, right? So there should be a better network in place. There should be a safer infrastructure. And the last part of the question that was, how would I make it, right?
Yeah, like what would be your ideal, like perfect mode,
Mhm.
you know, like how your perfect mode
Yeah.
of transportation?
Oh, so for good transportation, I would say definitely more sustainable modes. For the last part of residential deliveries, definitely cargo bikes. But I do believe that for transit people, for transit or for moving people, that answer would be completely different. And one of the other things that I really want to mention is that a one person only vehicle is very impactful on the on the current transportation network. So the use of transit, the use of bike, the use of things that are smaller vehicles or shared vehicles would definitely help us become more sustainable, and definitely to help ease all the congestion that is in place. So I have an idea of of my perfect good and freight delivery network, but I think that we're still very far away from there. And also there's way more research needed. There's way more involvement needed from many parts of the society, so as we can reach a perfect network. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for that. Another little virtual round of applause for Carla, and welcome to Chicago.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your research, and thank you for everyone for staying. I know we went a few minutes after. Um, we would love to see you also at our next virtual presentation. Our next presentation will be on Wednesday, April 10th from 2 to 3 p.m. also on Zoom, and we're actually going to be having Dr. Safayan from the Department of Disability and Human Development, where they'll also be able to share their own research in a similar style that Carla so graciously shared the research with us today. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And if you would like to rewatch this presentation, it will be available on our LCC YouTube. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today.